Hello and welcome to New Era. I'm Katie Preston, Head of Project at SportsPro, and this is a podcast where you'll hear from the trailblazers across sport who are striving for fair representation, the change makers shaping the industry, and the brands investing in the future. Today, as always, I'm joined by my co-host and SportsPro's content executive, Elena Kouyoufa.
Thanks, Katie, for your intro. I'm really excited to have Nolan from Curling Canada and Susan from Kruger Products with us today. We've got a very exciting conversation lined up. Just before we get started, I want to say that Curling Canada is a partner of our New Era program. So we're going to touch on later what this means to us and for Curling Canada in terms of advocating for women in sport. Obviously, Kruger has been a long time partner of Curling Canada, now 44 years. So I think, it's over 4-decade-long sponsorship of the Scotties Tournament of Hearts and the support recently that was announced for the Girls Rock program. So I think it's a very exciting time, both for curling and from Kruger. It would be great to hear kind of your past. Nolan, if you want to get started, maybe give us a bit of an intro to you, like how you've ended up in this role and what this partnership means.
Yeah, so I was a curler before I started working in curling. Represented Curling Canada 4 times internationally, won a couple of world championships. And I started working in the business and I wanted to learn kind of the business of amateur sport. And one of the big things early on that showcased to me was, what we do from a gender equity standpoint. And to me, I find it awesome because nobody says like, oh, way to go Curling Canada. They sit there and they just say it's curling. We don't have the discussion about do they get the same amount of TV coverage. Nobody puts an event against the Scotties because they know that they would get destroyed in their ratings, right? Like everybody wants to watch the Scotties. So, and for me, it goes back a long ways. Like I was a little kid in small town Canada watching curling on TV, and the first major event that came to my hometown was the 1993 Scotties Tournament of Hearts. And I'm there, and there was a team from Brandon, so I'm there in the stands, with my little Manitoba flag cheering for my team at that event, right? And that kind of led me down the path of maybe I want to start to do this, right? It is very cool, and that's why I wanted the job that I have now, because it's, investing in the power of sport, and there's nothing greater than the Scotties Tournament of Hearts for us.
And Susan, I don't know if you've had a similar background kind of in sport, or if you can share kind of how you've ended up in the position you've got at Kruger and maybe how this whole partnership came about.
So just a little bit of background. I've been at Kruger Products now for 5 years. And as the Chief Marketing Officer, I look after leading our marketing team to set the vision, the strategic direction in order to drive business performance across all of our brands, be it communication campaigns, our sponsorships like the Scotties Tournament of Hearts, innovation, but everything we can do to drive performance and purpose behind our brands. Sport has always been a significant part of my life. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, so a small, well, not that small, but a northern Ontario town. And sport was just part of our family life in terms of cross-country skiing, sailing in the summer, but it was just part of our family ritual in terms of what we did in northern Ontario. I was a gymnast and a downhill skier, but then had knee problems and took our family sport of sailing a little bit more seriously, and then ended up on the national team and campaigned for the 1992 and 96 Olympics. I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for sport. I've got 2 young boys and spent a lot of time in hockey arenas and lacrosse fields. And I really believe that sport is the cornerstone to community, and it really does help build and foster healthy and happy humans. And sport is just so important in terms of building lifelong skills, because you learn so much in terms of how to work as a team, how to conquer failures, how to be a good sportsman, how to be a great teammate. There's just so many skills that sport teaches you that are crucial to being a good leader in life. Beyond that, I am on the board for the Canadian Women in Sport in Canada, as well as the Ontario Hockey Federation. So I believe it's really important to give back. So I spend a lot of time outside of my regular job working to drive sports in Canada. The Scotties is very near and dear to my heart. You don't typically hear sporting events that are named after your brand, but it is a very important partnership for our company and a pride point, honestly. I mean, to be able to say 44 years, I don't think there's very many companies that can say that they've been the title sponsor of a national marquee event for 44 years, especially for women. And the fact that we have been sponsoring women in sport before it came a thing, right? Now it's the talk of the town. But to be the longest standing supporter of women in sport is something that our organization is very proud of. And our partnership with Curling Canada and everything that we've been able to do to continue to draw the momentum behind women in sport and specifically women in curling.
Amazing. And we'll touch on later kind of more about how this partnership came to life and the vision for it. I know you mentioned kind of the trajectory women's sport is on and how now a lot of companies are looking to get involved. And obviously you've done that from way back when. I know, Katie, you did a bit of a deep dive in terms of some stats around, women's sport in Canada. I don't know if you want to fill us in on that part.
Yeah, for sure. And it's something that Susan and Nolan, I'm sure you can add to as well. I came across a research study. It was conducted last year. So I think these stats are relatively up to date, but hopefully these numbers have grown even more. But it was conducted by the Canadian Women in Sport Centre. They polled Canadians between ages 13 and 65, so quite a wide range. And they found that 2 in 3 Canadians, 67% of those who were conducting the study, considered themselves to be fans of women's sport, which I think is a tremendous number compared to potentially other nations that we're seeing across the world even now. That's equivalent to 17 million Canadians. So 8 in 10 fans of pro women's sports are excited about the future of women's sport in Canada. And it's really driven by these millennials, Gen Zs, families. I just found the numbers staggering in a really positive way.
I think when you look at our viewership, 50% of our broadcasts are women in sport broadcasts, and we have 10 million Canadians watch every season, right? So that's about 1 in 4 Canadians will watch just curling. I think there is a lot of excitement for it. And I do know, even for us, it's exciting because we've worked with a few of the athletes that are helping get some of the other leagues off the ground. And, people like Steph Labbe, the Canadian women's goalkeeper from the gold medal team in 2020 Olympics. And, they come to us and ask questions of sort of like, how do you get from A to B, right? And that's the cool part of it for us. And it's really cool because, as I've said, and this is one of the changes we've made too, is we've tried to change the mentality of it from saying there's no qualifiers with it. There's no, this is great for women. This is amazing sport. This is people that are living their dreams. We have some of the most famous Canadian athletes who play in our event. And that was one of the things, especially, when I started working on the events, that I really tried to push was like, stop trying to qualify everything. You don't need softer music. You don't need to treat it differently. Like, this is one of the biggest sporting events in Canada, end of sentence. And it's not just, this is cool for women, which I think is a really important step for a lot of people. It's not from a social good. It's because it's riveting sport. People are driven to sport when they feel this passion for it, right? And that's what I think we've been able to build.
And just so many great household names. If you look at curling, what I love about curling specifically, and then also what's going on in Canada right now is professional women's sports. PWHL just finished their first season. Just last week, they had almost, I think it was 19,000 fans. They filled our Scotiabank Arena where the Toronto Maple Leafs play. The new soccer league has been announced, the NSL, and then Toronto Tempo. So there's a lot of momentum. But if you look at women's curling, equal prize money, viewership stats, filling the rinks, this has been going on for a really long time, and it's pretty incredible. But Jennifer Jones, just one example, is a household name in Canada. And she has done so much for women's sports in Canada, just based on how well she's done before she had someone to really look up to. But if you look at her and Haley Wickenheiser, Jana Hefford, they all support each other. They all show up at each other's games because it's not just the right thing to do, it's what they want to do. And it's pretty incredible how all of these professional leagues that are just starting out, how all of these women support each other because there is room for everyone. That's what's so lovely about women's sports. And if you look at the fan base too, it's a totally different fan base that is now going to games. We're all still going to love going to the NHL and watching men's games as well. But what's so exciting is that women are bringing in a different fan base, which is just helping grow sports in Canada.
Yeah, I think it's great to see this support and love for curling. I think Katie and I will agree on the fact that, you know, curling is not a big sport in Europe. A lot of people probably, I think the only exposure they might have is the Olympics, where you actually get to see it. It's really nice to see and hear these stats that you were saying in the support and the demographics supporting, you know, the sport over there. I think, Susan, you mentioned kind of the Toronto Tempo right now. Obviously, that's the first Canadian WNBA team. There's a lot of eyes now turning to Canada because of that and big partnerships happening. I don't know, Nolan, in your case, if you've seen more momentum, if you've seen eyes falling on other sports now, for example, curling, because, you know, of interest there, or other partners trying to invest in the sport as well. Because as you said, like, the Scotties is, you know, a strong team, but obviously, like the WNBA, are globally recognized because their sport is played all over the world. So I'd be interested to hear kind of your take on, you know, how this momentum has maybe fueled things.
It's interesting because I haven't felt we've got as much of that kick because it's curling. It's not the new niche thing. It's been around forever. And as I said, we don't kind of get the credit for what was done. And again, I can't take credit for it. When the event first started, I was 2. So, I mean, I wasn't on the ground floor, but I think from what our sport has done is one of those examples. And as I said, that's where we get calls from other people because they're like, how do we look like you look in 40 years, right? How is our league or our teams getting that same equal footing? And like, you know, we don't see a dip in our ratings. Like Scotties final was our highest rated broadcast last year, right? Like we don't see those dips between events. It's just, you know, our curling fans are invested, and that some of that is from being a niche sport for sure. But I haven't seen a huge kick, but I have seen a lot asking us going, how are we a Kruger that does this forever, right?
Yeah. Susan, obviously I know you've not been with Kruger from back then, but I don't know if you know kind of the vision and mission behind that initial partnership.
The sponsorship came about when Kruger bought Scott Towels. So it was something that we inherited way back when. Nolan, I don't know if you know the history, because it wasn't part of Kruger Products when we bought Scott Towels. When we bought Scott Towels, it was always called the Scotties Tournament of Hearts. Yeah. And it was something that when we bought the brands, it was something that the organization just wanted to continue, given that we're a Canadian company and making everyday life more comfortable being our vision. It just continued to fit in terms of giving back to the communities in which we serve. But Nolan, I don't know if you know when Scott signed or what the rationale was 44 years ago.
When they first signed, my understanding is at that time there was a Curl Canada and a Canadian Ladies Curling Association. So there's actually 2 associations. So Scott Towell went to the Canadian Ladies Curling Association and said, we've got this big men's championship called the Briar. We want to create our own championship for the women's. And so that's where they started that. And then when the Canadian Ladies Curling Association and Curl Canada merged, it kind of continued on, and it's just been ingrained as a part of our business and a part of our broadcast contracts and a part of our whole business ever since. I think at the time, curling was growing broadcast wise. I think, you know, at one point, you know, there'd be maybe the playoff games or whatever would be on television. And I think in kind of the early 80s, especially with TSN getting started, which is our ESPN or Sky Sports, kind of one of their pillars was curling. And to have, a week-long championship like the women's, and then a week-long championship like the men's, and then a couple of world championships, it was a really great property to be a part of. And that's how it's kind of continued on from there.
I think the other thing too that's very different in terms of our event and pro sports is it's once a year, right? It's the Scotties is 1 week, a marquee event that people look forward to buying tickets to, and it changes cities every year. And so it's really exciting when you change cities all the time because you're bringing in new fans, and fans get very excited when it comes to their hometown. And then obviously a massive broadcast with TSN, our partner. It's very different than professional sports where they play in one city, and then when they're traveling out of town, it's only, if you look at the PWHL, they've got 6 teams. So they're in Toronto, and then they play elsewhere. So what's different is our event travels different host cities, but it's only once a year. So you're not buying season tickets. You're going to an event that's really exciting, kind of like the Olympics, right? That only comes every 4 years. But just back to, I guess, the vision of the partnership and why it works so well for Kruger is, as I said, our motto is all about making everyday life more comfortable. And there's just something so powerful in terms of celebrating Canadian curlers, connecting with communities through sport, and a commitment that really extends our products to creating, as I said, healthier and happier communities. And curling just does such a great job because the event travels, and then you also have the national broadcast.
Yeah, I'd call it a bit of the traveling circus, right? Like we come to town, and the cool part about our events is they kind of take over the town for a while, right? Like we'll go to a city and it's just, you see the Scotties Tournament of Hearts logo with the 4 hearts, and then you see that painted on shop windows and, all that stuff all around town, right? You're just walking into some little mom and pop shop to get a sandwich, and they're like, oh, you're here for the curling and all of that, right? So it's really cool. I say our 2 championships, they're just such a little piece of Canadiana. It's just, I think people are so used to it, and it's, they turn on the TV in February and the Scotties is on, and then the Briar, and then once every 10 years or whatever, it's in their town or it's close to them. So then they get to go and actually sit in the venue and feel the whole experience of it. So it's just such a cool little piece. It's a little different here in Canada, but makes it really special.
And it really is such a pride point. I mean, I had the honor of being at the press conference last week where Curling Canada announced that the 45th Scotties will be held in Mississauga. There was tons of people at the press conference, but the excitement of the city of Mississauga, putting that bid forward, winning the bid, and the fact that they're bringing curling to Mississauga was just so exciting for them. And I know what happens in Thunder Bay. I know what happens in Calgary when they get the news that they won their bid. But there's just something so magical, as Nolan said, when the circus comes to town, all these incredible athletes. I mean, curlers are friendly and they're just so Canadian. And when they come, they make time to talk to their fans. I mean, I watch the women, for the past 5 years, and they make time for fans and those little girls that aspire to be athletes someday, and their heroes are on the ice and they're talking to them. It's just really magical.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I was recently reading this article about saying how Elena, the rugby player, spent 90 minutes after her match signing and talking to fans. And it's, yes, she's a household name, but as you said, like there are athletes who do that all the time, and it's their norm, and it's good to shout about it and talk about it. I know then you kind of touched upon the excitement. I would be interested to hear kind of what these fans look like, if you've had any amazing fan experience, because I think we've all got ideas of how basketball fans act, how football fans act. I don't know what the curling fan looks like.
Well, it's actually funny because our game isn't super loud. It kind of ebbs and flows, and some fans think, oh, the curlers want it really quiet. And I'm like, no, they don't. They want it loud. Like they want to play in a vibrant arena, and we're improving that experience. I think we've got a ways to go, but we're improving that. I think what's really cool about those championships, though, the way we run them, because everyone's representing, like Team Canada is the defending champion, and then we're representing, all of the provinces and territories in Canada. And all of a sudden you just hear someone yell Ontario, right? And then someone yells BC because they're playing BC across. And so I think that's the one piece. And, Susan was talking about the athletes and what they do. Like, I know my director of comms doesn't love it because he's trying to get people back to the media scrums, but I think it's super cool. Like, our athletes, people just come down to the boards, right? It's that feel that they can have. They can walk down to the boards and just say, can you sign this? And our athletes just stand there and sign autographs for 20 minutes before they leave after the game, right? And it's just, they know that everything doesn't happen without fans. It's those little, sometimes it's a hello to somebody. And, Susan was talking about Jennifer Jones. Like, I've always thought she was the best at it. Like, she knew that what her place was in Canadian sports and what it means to say, like, actually have a conversation with someone and say, like, how are you doing? And, are you interested in curling? Or have you, talking to a little girl and say, have you just started curling? And what do you love about it? Those are super important. And all of our athletes really get that.
With the 44th edition of the Scotties coming up, gosh, when is it? Next week? 14th to 23rd of Feb. It's closing in. Are there any, we've obviously been talking about the fan engagement side of things and the athletes' engagement with it all. Are there any special celebrations or initiatives that you've got planned to mark the 44th edition of the event?
Not as much for the 44th. The 40th was the most interesting one because it was ran in a bubble in COVID. Susan was doing her remarks on video and uploading them so that it could be on TSN.
From my backyard.
In her backyard, yeah, setting her backyard.
Outside in my backyard.
In end of January, early February in Canada. So you can imagine what that was like. I think next year we'll have some bigger stuff because it's in where Kruger's head offices are in Mississauga, which is a first for us. 45th, kind of a nice round number. I think the Thunder Bay is going to be interesting. We've got one team that is there, the host team. They've kind of been the perennial runners up. And Kristen McCarville, she's the teacher in town for 358 days a year. And then for these 7 days, she's Kristen McCarville, the curler. And we're in a really old building with a ton of character, and it's going to be loud because there's none of that new technology to kind of keep the noise down. So it's going to be loud and people are there cheering for Northern Ontario. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Nice. And one of the biggest barriers in women's sports is access, right? If girls don't see that clear pathway, they're less likely to stay involved in a sport. And it brings me on to Curling Canada's girls program. Nolan, for anyone listening, is rocking the lovely sweatshirt and the lovely merch. The Girls Rock is an initiative that is dedicated to creating opportunities for girls to explore their social, mental and physical development through sports. And Susan, obviously, within your sort of intro bit, you mentioned how important that was for you. Elena and I can also relate, although we're not elite athletes, so maybe on a lesser scale. It was recently announced that Kruger will be presenting partner, as we've touched upon, extending both its advocacy for equal opportunities and its commitment to sort of meaningful investments for girls and women's sport. Susan, do you want to sort of elaborate a bit more on that? Tell us a bit more about your involvement with the initiative.
Yeah, we're thrilled to be the sponsors of Girls Rock. I think there's two important things for sport. Number one, obviously, seeing women at the top of their game at the national level. It's important for young girls and women to see it, right? If you see it, you can be it. So, it's always nice to have that at the top of the pyramid in terms of the best athletes in their sport. But at the end of the day, you've got to feed the funnel, if you will. And we need to ensure that we're investing at the community level to ensure that girls are joining sport, because girls do drop out of sport at a more rapid rate than boys do. So initiatives like these really help to introduce girls to the game, build their confidence, and have them join a great sport. And cost is always a barrier too. So when you bring programs like this forward, it's just an easier way for parents to be able to access sport.
Yeah, that's the biggest piece for us too, is you don't get to be in the Scotties if you don't kind of stay as a part and feel like a sense of home as a part of the sport. So investing in that pipeline is super important for us. And as Susan said, like, the data shows that, teenage girls between 12 and 16 are more likely to drop out of sport, right? And we want to give them a safe place to feel comfortable. And, I've got 2 daughters now that are in their 20s, but like I was a dad following them around at, their volleyball and ringette games and all those things. And those hard teenage years sometimes, and to be able to give them the confidence to still be a part of sport is something that's why we wanted to invest in Girls Rock and why we were excited that Kruger wanted to partner with us in it. And I think for us as well, that's one of the cool things is that this is, one of our longest standing partners. It's one thing to sponsor a major event and one of the national championships, but to sit there and say, we want to help invest in one of your programs that, pays off 10 years down the road, right? Like, I think that's the cool part is we see someone, the 2035 Scotties that says, I went to Girls Rock in Calgary and in 2024 and it just kind of sparked that passion for me to stay as part of the game. And I think that's what we're really most excited about as well. And just having partners that want to invest in the whole sports experience as opposed to, just our major events.
And really for us to, supporting programs like Girls Rock, it really fits in terms of our commitment of creating healthy and happy communities. As I said earlier, we know that empowering young athletes not only strengthens the future of curling, but it also builds confidence and resilience, as Nolan said, in participants. And it's skills that extend beyond the rink or beyond their sport, right? It's just so important. So programs like Girls Rock is really making sports more inclusive and representative.
I'd be interested to hear kind of what the format of Girls Rock looks like, who that appeals to, what the program looks like. Obviously, there's different, dimensions to it in terms of like the mental, physical, like the breaking down all those barriers. Like, how does that work in practice?
Yeah, it's women led, women taught, and then girls between the age of 9 and 16. We've got a thing called the Women in Curling Group, which is an executive council that kind of and they led this last year as sort of the first step. And then we bring this program forward and we hand it over to some of our member associations. And I think 9 of the 14 member associations ran at least one of these last year. And it's just kind of giving them confidence, giving them the safe space to go out on the ice and go, I've never really tried curling before. I'm not that good at it. But no one's going to laugh at me. No one's going to think anything's wrong of me as I start to get my feel for this, right? And that's really the main emphasis of it, is to just this safe space to just go learn and try something new and see if you love it, but taught by women leaders who have been there and who have went through this whole sport and see the benefits of it.
So New Era for us is all about role models and those driving for change. So I think that fits in really nicely with the Girls Rock program. Aside from those paving the way on the ice, that we've mentioned many of the female athletes that are doing great work, who are some of the off-ice figures that are really making a difference in women's sport, whether it be the leaders, Nolan, that are leading the Girls Rock program, or those working at Curling Canada, or Susan, any colleagues that you have, who are sort of the off-ice figures that are really leading the way?
For us, we've got a couple of leaders on our senior management team, Brody Besney and Tanya Colburn and Catherine Dunlop and people that, are partly different functions for Curling Canada, and they really invest in that. I know for me, like we talked about my role from going from athlete to being a curler, like one of my mentors was Catherine Henderson. She was the CEO of Curling Canada when I left the field of play and started working there. And very early on with Curling Canada, she said, I think you could do my job one day. So I'm going to show you some things and help you. So whenever I feel like whenever it's my time to leave Curling Canada, and then you're going to be ready, right? And then it happened because, she left and she went and took the Hockey Canada job, which is a super important NSO here, National Sports Organization here in Canada. And, so mentors like that who just mentor people. those are kind of the big names that jump to mind. But then the athletes on the ice, like you see the Jennifer Jones we've talked about, Rachel Holman is the, the best female curler in the world right now by a lot. And we've got a team like Carrie Anderson who won 4 Scotties in a row. Like those are the athletes, and those are the ones that we take them in front of. They go talk to these athletes and they see that it's, it's not, ooh, Carrie Anderson, this amazing curler. It's Carrie, and she's got 2 little daughters, right? She's got 2 twins. That's the other piece. Because our sport has a longer shelf life as being at the top of your game, you're seeing a lot of moms that are out there, right? Most of our top athletes aren't just straight out of university. As I said, Rachel Holman's the number 1 team in the world right now. Like she's got 3 kids. Her third's got a son. Like her lead's got a daughter. Like there's so many moms out there and people who, have a child during a season and then the next season they're standing on the podium, right? Which is awesome, right? I think that's such a cool thing to showcase to people that it's like, you don't have to choose. You don't have to just say like, oh, I can't be an athlete anymore. I'm going to go be a family person now. You can do both in our sport.
And not only that, what's incredible is many of these women are not just moms. They're actually doctors and lawyers and teachers.
Yeah.
So they do it all. They wear the mom hat, they wear the career hat, and they wear the athlete hat, which is pretty impressive.
Amazing. Yeah, no, that is definitely very, very impressive. And yeah, I hope more women kind of see that, well, female athletes and so on, because it is something that's talked about a lot and kind of the policies other sports have in terms of allowing female athletes to return to sport or how they can, continue that. But as you said, like women can do it all. And, it's an extra reason to support and do that. And kind of, you mentioned the support, and obviously, as we've said, like Kruger has been there right from the beginning. But, nowadays in women's sport particularly, we hear the word allyship quite a lot. It's become a bit of a buzzword. But obviously there have been people who have been allies of sport, of women's sport, of initiatives like Girls Rock from the get-go. I think, Susan, just because of this partnership, I'd be interested for you to share kind of what people can do to be proper allies, because it's not just about, speaking and saying that word. What makes you a proper ally?
So I think there's 3 things that are important in order to be an ally for women in sports and to help champion change. It's important for all of us to change perceptions of women in sport. And it's not just the responsibility of the athletes alone, or the NSOs, or the professional organizations. Sponsors play a huge role in terms of investing in women's sports and athletes, signaling really their value and potential to the broader market. Because it also just helps fuels resources and training and investment behind them in order for them to excel. The second one is media. Media holds a massive power and really helps shape the narratives and normalize representation. And I think it's really important for the media to continue to highlight stories of women athletes, broadcasting, ensuring that it's female broadcasters and giving them equal coverage. There's a lot that we need media to do, and that's not just the broadcasters, that's also PR and the stories that our newscasters tell and writers of the game, if you will. And then the third one is fans. It is important for us to show up, right? At the end of the day, we need to fill the arenas. We need to fill the stands. We need to buy merchandise, right? So there's a huge role for fans to play as well.
Yeah. Nolan, if you want to add to that, obviously, from the component of Curling Canada, but also you mentioned you have daughters as well. What does that look like? What support is needed?
I brought it up a little bit earlier too when I was talking about how there's no qualifiers. I think that's the other piece of it too, right? It's not this is good for female athletes. And that's what Susan was talking about, buy merch, go to the venue, right? Like don't just say that, you love the sport or you're supportive of it. it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to show it with your actions. And that's what actually leads to businesses that make sense, right? And we see it in the States right now with the WNBA, right? And the Caitlin Clark effect over the last year. Like, I think I've seen a change in the coverage of that, right? Like, it's, for me as well, it's, you know, as a sports fan, part of following sports is also just the talk around it, right? And it's not just, okay, there's a game on TV. It's like the talking heads conversation on TV and stuff. And you're starting to see that a lot more. Like, I see it with people discussing stuff that's happening in the WNBA or stuff that's happening in the Professional Women's Hockey League here in Canada and all of that stuff, and actual analysis of the sport, as opposed to just it's on TV because it's on TV, right? It's the whole infrastructure around sport, and that's where the real growth comes in.
For sure. So before we wrap up, and you know you started touching on that anyway, but sort of looking ahead and the excitement that's still to come, what, not just for curling, but women's sport in general in Canada, what excites you most? What are the biggest opportunities to come still?
Well, I mean, I think it's really cool, you know, for us. Yeah, obviously next year, you know, we've got a Scotties happening in about 10 days time. And then, you know, we've got the 45th in Kruger's home in Mississauga next year. And, you know, that's a market we haven't been in very much in Canada. The Toronto market is one that we haven't been to as much. So we're really excited to go give that a shot. You know, for sports in general, I just think there's so many more opportunities and exposure for, you know, as I said, like having two girls, like looking back 15, 20 years ago, if they would have been able to see the Professional Women's Hockey League or whatever, I think those are cool things to see. Like, hey, I can chase my dreams, right? And then that's what curling does do. When, you know, when a little girl, you know, gets the bug and starts loving curling at 13, they say, you know, what do they say? They say they want to win Olympic gold and they want to win a Scotties, right? Like, those are the two things that they want to win. And we even saw it, like, you know, one of the athletes, it's, you know, as we're thinking about it, she's won 2 Olympic gold medals, but Caitlin Laws, she won the Olympic gold in 2014, but she hadn't won the Scotties yet. And she was like, I got to win a Scotties, right? Like, it was like she had won the Olympic gold medal and didn't feel like her career was really complete yet until her name was on that trophy, right? That's the stuff that I think you want to continue to have. The aspirational things, that's what makes it so special.
For sure. And Susan, same question to you. What excites you most over the next couple of years to come about women's sport?
I mean, for me, what excites me the most is the attention and the momentum. And it's not just the momentum behind professional sports for women, but it's also the investment in grassroots, specifically talking about Scotties. You know, just, you know, the viewership continues to be so strong behind the Scotties Tournament of Hearts, sharing the stories of just incredible women who participate, but also the investment in grassroots, like programs like Girls Rock. And so that's really what excites me, just the momentum behind grassroots as well as professional. And, you know, I think there's a challenge that I'd like to give the community and those that are listening to the podcast. And, you know, that's just the push of the ability for sponsors to continue to amplify their investments in grassroots in order to nurture young talent, but also, you know, help expand professional opportunities for women athletes. Go attend games, buy the merchandise, watch it on television. But it's really important for all of us to be that fan and amplify their voice, if you will.
Well, Susan, you've just taken away my little summary and wrap up. So I'm glad it came from you rather than me. But yeah, for those listening, whether you're a fan, decision maker, whoever you may be, everything Susan just outlined is very small things that you can do to help in the future of women's sport. And definitely go and get yourself one of those Girls Rock sweatshirts to help that way too.
I like it.
But Elena, I'll hand it over to you.
But yeah, no, all these points are really, really important. And it's something, you know, everyone at every level of a company, an organization, you know, a family, you know, whether you're a brother, a mom, a dad, you know, grandparent, whatever, you know, you have to do your little part in supporting. It doesn't have to be anything huge. And we talk about that a lot. So I hope all our listeners kind of go off from this, and whether that's, switching on the TV and watching a women's game, or whatever that might be, or buying merch, as you just said, if anyone can see the one Nolan is wearing, it's lovely and colorful. So I would love to rock that. But, I think it's been a very insightful conversation we've had. So Susan and Nolan, thank you very, very much. And we'll look forward to the tournament coming up.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
It was nice meeting you. Thank you for letting us share our story.
Both.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.